Welcome, course takers, to Section 3, Security. Now, in this section, we'll cover a lot of things around security, from identity federation and IAM, multi-factor authentication, monitoring, and service-specific security like EC2, S3. We might mention things around EC2 and S3 and VPCs that we haven't gone into a lot of detail. Don't worry. There are some more videos in this course that focus on those things specifically. And of course, this is not aimed at the novice, the beginner. This is aimed at people who've had some experience of AWS and want to pass the AWS Developer Associate exam. Video number 1, AWS Global Infrastructure Security. So in this video, we're going to discuss the overall approach Amazon takes to its global infrastructure and the things that it does on our behalf for pretty much everybody. We'll talk a little bit about the global infrastructure, what the shared security model is, and then we'll talk about some of the tools and some of the techniques used from DDoS to Trusted Advisor. So if you're ready, let's get started. So Amazon are responsible for their regions, the availability zones, their edge locations. I think there's about 16 regions available worldwide now, and a countless number of edge locations as well, and they're growing daily, it seems. And then they'll look after the compute, the storage, the database, the networking, the stuff that's in those regions. And from a software point of view, they'll manage the software that they're responsible for. So the virtualization layer, the managed services. Everything else is up to us. It's up to you, it's up to me, the consumers. So how does Amazon manage their global infrastructure? So the first thing they do is they keep up to date with industry certifications. ISO 27001. So if you want to have a look at that, you can go to their website. Okay, and here you have all the information. Click on compliance. We can begin to see what industries, what data privacy. So this is a great website for going to and looking at what more information do we need to know. You can view the compliance program, see what they're doing, and here's all the compliances. So ISO 9001, 27001, PCI compliance, and then in the US, here's all these various things in Asia and in Europe. Okay, so it's a great resource, this website, for going to see various bits and pieces. So they publish information about AWS security and control practices in white papers, and we'll talk about that. So there you see AWS Risk and Compliance white paper. It's a very dry white paper, I've got to say, but it's important to read some of it. And then they'll provide certificates, reports directly to AWS customers. Some require NDA. So one thing to bear in mind, they do engage with external certification bodies and independent auditors. So Amazon don't tend to, for example, certify your environment to be PCI DSS compliant. What they will do is allow third-party auditors to do that for you. So some questions you do get in the exam around who does the auditing and compliance. Well, you do, and your independent auditors do. Amazon simply provide the information. One of the things they do focus on, and something they mention in the exam, is around DDoS protection. So for those not really familiar with denial of service, so those that don't know, denial of service is a single attacker really targeting a single service. And basically what they're going to do is bombard that service until that service can't function, it falls over, or the attacker finds a vulnerability. And some vulnerabilities become visible only when the system is stressed. The good thing about that is the attacker can only get to a certain size, so you're capable of outrunning a single denial of service attack. So if you've got auto-scaling and you scale automatically, you can outrun the capability of what the attacker can do. With a distributed denial of service attack, you don't have that luxury anymore, because what happens is the attacker has controllers and lots of bots, and now you can't unrun that. So now you can't get away from that attack. So if you look at some of the recent 2017 attacks, 24,000 computers from over 30 countries trying to disrupt 5 Russian banks. And then you look at October 21, the Dying attack, 100,000 servers attacking October 21. And then you look at the October 21st, the Mirai botnet attack, which is over 100,000 servers. You can't scale to meet that. So if we look at a denial of service attack, that tends to be a single attacker attacking a target, and the whole point is to try and bombard that target so eventually the target stops working or the attacker can exploit a vulnerability that comes out under stress or load. The good thing about a single denial of service attack is you can outrun it. So if you've got auto scaling or you can block that attacker's traffic, then you won't see any impact. Distributed denial of service is a lot harder to block. So the attacker has controllers, the controllers have bots. Now you can't outrun it. Now it's very hard to block those particular bot attacks because whenever you block them, they spring up. And you can look at the numbers underneath. So 24,000 computers across 30 countries, targeting 5 Russian banks, 100,000 devices attacking Dyn. You can't outrun that. You can't stop that. It's very hard to manage. So distributed denial of service is a very real problem. So Amazon have come up with a couple of reference architectures. So the key thing here is for a web application, you can use something called AWS Shield to protect both outside and internal resources, depending on your support contract. When you've got non-web applications, then you can still use Shield for things like DNS and within your load balancers, but you've still got a lot of things to understand. So in order to stop DDoS attack, you can rely on technology, but you also have to be ready to scale out. You have to try and minimize the amount of endpoints, the amount of things you expose to the internet, and you need to build for resilience. A very important part, and something that Amazon stress quite a lot, is you need to understand what normal looks like for you. Because it might be that you've suddenly just got an influx of traffic rather than a DDoS attack. Shield plays an important part. So thinking about the attacks, there are 2 types of attacks: infrastructure layer attacks, which try to attack the underlying infrastructure, so firewalls, load balancers, etc., and typically use TCP/IP or networking exploits. And then you've got the application layer attacks, which are higher level protocols, things like HTTP or actual application vulnerabilities, WordPress. So a lot of the things that Amazon do focus on the infrastructure layer attacks, but you can't afford to ignore the application vulnerabilities. So if you think about Shield, Shield's a very important technology. So everybody gets Shield or can have Shield standard at least, which allows you to cope with the majority of basic infrastructure attacks. So sync and UDP floods, reflection attacks. If you want to spend a bit more time and have 24-hour support, then you need to have a business or enterprise support agreement. You can still use standard, but you're probably more likely to use advanced. So the basic premise here is, yes, Shield will work, and Shield's an excellent piece of technology to support infrastructure, to prevent infrastructure level attacks. But from a developer point of view, you still need to think about application security. You can put things like WAFs in place, web application firewalls, but you still need to make sure your application is not running code that has vulnerabilities that will allow you to be exposed if you have a DDoS attack. So you need to think about application security. Shield is one step, but it is not everything. A couple of other things: penetration testing. You can do penetration testing on your resources, and it's advantageous to do so, but you must get Amazon's permission first. So if you start just doing a penetration test, Amazon will notice it and they will be a bit annoyed. So raise a support ticket. The other resource you can use is AWS Trusted Advisor. So AWS Trusted Advisor does a lot of things. When I started using AWS, Trusted Advisor was a professional services engagement. They would come out, they would look at how you're using Amazon, look at all the things that you're doing, and they'd come back with a rule check. Now it's all automated, and anybody can use Trusted Advisor. To get a certain degree of information, you need to have a business or enterprise support agreement, or at least you need to have a better support agreement than basic. But what it does allow you to do is cost optimization, performance, security, fault tolerance, and quite importantly, service limits. So some of those are obviously well-architected frameworks. Let's have a quick look at Trusted Advisor. So we'll go to our AWS console, click on Trusted Advisor. It gives you a dashboard. You can see some nice green ticks. So it will actually look at your infrastructure and say, well, look, I'm going to use some IAM roles. I'm not using any unrestricted ports. So it does give you a lot of information. If we focus in on the security, there's lots of things I'm not checking and doing here. So I haven't enabled CloudTrail logging. I'm not using unrestricted access. So I will need to upgrade Trusted Advisor, but it is a really helpful tool to use, and it's free of charge for the majority of things. One useful limit, and this is not purely security, but we'll talk about it anyway, is service limits. So I mentioned about performance and reliability. Here's a good where you are from a service limit point of view to do with your account. Okay, so that was Trusted Advisor.